Good morning, Morai Rabotai.
Good morning, Rabbi.
We are continuing on Masechet Avodah Zarah, Daf Chaf Aleph, Amud Aleph, on the very bottom of the Amud. Today's Amud is being learned. The Schud Yehoshua ben Diana, Yael bat Rivka, Menashe ben Asi. Today's Amud is also being learned. Leilui Nishmat Tzipora bat Yitzchak, Leilui Nishmat Menashe ben Yaakov, Leilui Nishmat Sadaf Simcha bat Faribat Tehila Eden, Avraham ben Esther, Farzaneh Diana, Bat Victoria, that their neshamot should have an aliyah. Amen. Amen. So, we are at the very bottom of the Amud, discussing the piece in the Gemara, speaking about renting houses and fields to Ovdei Avodah Zarah, to idol worshipping individuals. So we spoke about Eretz Yisrael. Again, this whole concept starts from the fact that the Torah says, "Lo tchonem, lo titen lahem chaniya bekarka." Don't give them foothold in the land. And we spoke about the fact that even in Chutz La'aretz, the concept of having a shchuna of the Avodah Zarah, creating a neighborhood of idol worshipping people in your midst, is going to be a problem, because we don't want that hashba'ah, we don't want that mindset and impact that neighbors of a person would have on a person. Therefore, it will be prohibited. We mentioned before the strong words of the Rambam. Rambam writes in the beginning of the Perek Shishi of Hilchot Deot in Sefer Mada, and he writes, and I quote, he says, "Derech beriyato shel adam liyod nimshach b'deotav u'b'drachav acharei re'av v'chaverav v'noheh ke'anshe medinato." A person is wired, is created in such way that we are drawn and impacted after the mindsets and the way people in our midst act and do things. So we have a culture. The culture is very powerful. The pasuk really says this: "Ve'ta'arvu ba'goyim va'yilmedu mimasehem." They went amongst the goyim and they learned from their actions and from their deeds. So therefore, we don't want that type of impact. It's to sell to a goy is mutar, but an oved avodah zarah, an idol worshipping individual, you don't want to do. So that's the core element that we started speaking about. Now the Gemara discuss, you can't sell to three people. How about if you sell a large property to one person, and then they may divide it and sell it themselves to different goyim? So Abaye said, "Alifne mefaktinan, alifne derifne, lo mefaktinan," that we are only careful in the direct result of our action. It's like a borrowed term, says the Tosafot over here. It's not really the same concept that we had before in Daf Yudalet earlier on, for putting a stumbling block, lifnei iver. But here it's talking about if you're directly causing a neighborhood of idol worshipping individuals, fine. But if you're not doing it, you just sold a large piece of land, property to one, and he went and he made a colony of other people and brought them in. That's not on you. Okay, so the Gemara says now, Af b'makom she'amru laskir, that even in a place that Chazal said that you could rent, you could still, when you could rent it, it's not necessarily rental for living, but it is for storage and so on and so forth. Because we mentioned that the Oved Avodah Zarah, when he comes into a house, what does he do? He brings his idol with him. That's the idol worshipping individuals, and therefore the house is still yours. You're renting it to them, and you will be in transgression of lo tavi to'eva el betecha. Do not bring abomination into your house, into your domain. So therefore it will be a problem. But the Gemara now wants a little bit of a different thing from this. Says the Gemara, Miklal de'ika duchti de lo mugri. There are places, you see from here, that there are places that are not allowed to be rented to a goy. V'stamak Rabbi Meir, and the simple stam of the Mishnah over here follows Rabbi Meir, the Rabbi Yossi bechol duchta mugri. According to Rabbi Yossi, remember the chart that we made, Rabbi Meir holds that in Eretz Yisrael, you cannot rent any residential places or any fields to Oved Avodah Zarah, right? Rabbi Yossi holds, no, you can rent in Eretz Yisrael, there's no problem, rentals. Selling is a problem. So says the Gemara over here, you see from this piece at the end of the Mishnah also is said like Rabbi Meir, not like Rabbi Yossi. Fine. Now we start a little bit of a different tangent here. Says the Gemara by 2 dots, the second line, Ubekol makom lo yiskor, in any place you should not rent it. Tanya Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel Omer, lo yaskir adam mirchaso leovet kochavim. We mentioned in the Mishnah that you cannot, even if you're in Los Angeles, doesn't make a difference in Eretz Yisrael or Syria, but even in Chutz La'aretz, completely outside Eretz Yisrael, you should not rent your bathhouse to a goy. Why not? Nothing to do with Avodah Zarah here. But it's a Masechet Shabbat question. Because what happens when you have a bathhouse rented to a goy? He's going to work on Shabbat, but people who know this bathhouse, they say this is Shimon's bathhouse. This is Reuben's bathhouse. They know the owner. And therefore, they say, oh, Reuben's bathhouse is working on Shabbat. Must be he hired goyim to work on Shabbat, which is a transgression of Amira La'akum, of telling a goy to do something for you on Shabbat, which is Asur. So that's what the Mishnah says. It says the Gemara, Tanya, we learned the Braita. Rabban Shimon Gamliel Omer, Rabban Shimon Gamliel says, Lo yiskor adam merchatzo leovet kochavim, mipnei shenikra al shemo. You should not rent your bathhouse to Oved Kochavim because it is called still under your name. People know it as the owner's property. Ve'oved Kochavim ze oseh bo melacha b'Shabbatot v'yamim tovim. And the goy is going to be working on Shabbat and on Yom Tov. And therefore, people are going to think that this Yid, this Jew, is transgressing Shabbat by having goyim work for him. Fine. But then the Gemara says, Aval lekutimai shari. Here it says only to Oved Kochavim you can do. Remember, this is not in Eretz Yisrael. This is talking about Los Angeles, any other place, Chutz La'aretz, right? So it says the Gemara, the Braita says clearly, Rabban Shimon Gamliel says you can't give it to Oved Kochavim. How about to a kuti? What's a kuti? Now, kutim, we spoke about this many times. They were Jews who were very questionable, right? They were people who became, as a community, they became converts. And there was a cloud of machloket hovering on over them in the beginning, whether or not they are gere emet or they are gere arayot with an aleph, which means because of lions, they were attacked when they came in Shomron. This is the whole thing with Melech Ashur. And clearly they felt that they were subject of supernatural attacks, and they became gerim. They said, oh, this is Eretz Yisrael does not want abominations done in it. So they were doing certain things and they were attacked. So they said, we're going to become Jews. Now, if you say they're Gerei Arayot, that means it's just out of fear. They don't really believe in it. They just don't want to die. Right? If you say, is there Gerei Emet? Fine, so then they're legitimate Gerei Tzedek. They're legitimate converts. That's one question. But the Gemara in Chulin says that at some point, Chachamim, they made a clear declaration that Kutim are no good. They found that they were actually worshipping idols on top of a mountain. They had this Ke'en Surah Shel Yonah. They had like a statue of a bird, of a dove that they were serving, and they had gotten back to their previous ways of their forefathers, and therefore they kind of wrote them out of being part of the Jewish nation, right? So that's the history of the Kutim. And on top of that, the Kutim were not careful. They were careful in the biblical things, but they were not careful in rabbinic things. Anything that says clearly in the Torah, they kept it, and they kept it sometimes even better than some of the Jews. But things that are rabbinic, it doesn't say it clearly in the Chumash, in the Torah, they were not as careful. So says the Gemara, how about renting to a kuti? Can you rent your beta merchas to a kuti? Now, is he going to work on Shabbat or not?
Yeah. No.
Lo ta'aseh b'kol melacha, says in the Chumash. He's not going to work on Shabbat. He's going to work on Yom Tov? No. Kol melechat avodah. Lo ta'asu rak asher ya'achel lekol nefesh hir ado ya'aseh lachem, it says in about Yom Tov. You can only do melechet ochel nefesh. So, no. So what's the problem? You should be able to give it to a kuti. Apparently. Says the Gemara, so lekuti mai. What's the halacha to rent it to a kuti? Shari, is it mutar? So says the Gemara, kuti emar avid ba melacha bechol moed. The only difference is going to be chol moed. Chol moed, you can't work on chol moed, right? Unless there's like one of 4 or 5 really different things that because of them you could work, and so on and so forth, the mitzvah and tzorchei rabim and so on. So can't work at the Chol HaMoed, but it doesn't say in the Chumash, right? It's like Mikra Kodesh. You need drashot from the Pesukim to prove that on Chol HaMoed you can't work. That's what the Masechet Moed Katan is busy with, right? Do they believe in that? No. So he's going to work on Chol HaMoed. So maybe that's the problem. He's going to do melacha bechulo shel moed. The Gemara answers bechulo shel moed ananami avdinan. In Chol HaMoed we also do work for one of those mutter things. So therefore, it's not necessarily going to be a problem. Aval sadeu leovet kochavim mai. But your field, now this is about the bathhouse. But how about when he says, when Rav Moshe ben Gamliel says, you can't, in Chutz La'aretz, outside the Eretz Yisrael, you can't rent your bathhouse to a Oved Kochavim. How about your field? Can I rent my field to an Oved Kochavim? What's the problem? The problem is the same problem. Everyone knows that this is Reuben's land. And now they're passing by going to KBT on Shabbat, and they see the workers are working on Shabbat. Mutar or Asur? Well, it should be Asur because it's the same thing as the Merchatz, right? They will see activity on your land, on the Jews' land, on Shabbat, right? Maras is not so fast. My Tama, it says maybe it is Mutar. When he says you can't give your bathhouse to a goy, it means bathhouse is Asur, but a field is Mutar. And why would the field be Mutar? Says the Gemara, because Arisa Arisute Kavid. So what is this? Back in the day, the way in the time of the Gemara, and still a lot of places are like this, but back in the time of the Gemara, the way it worked was you owned the land, right? The goy, the Aris, whether it was a Jew or a goy, he would take care of the entire thing from A to Z, and instead of getting paid by the day, he would get paid by the percentage. That whatever produce that he had, he would take 20%. Now, what does that do? That's genius, because now when he works on Shabbat, why is he working? He doesn't have to work on Shabbat. He could take the Shabbat off and go do whatever he wants. But he's there because he has stakes inside. He wants 20% and he wants it to be perfect. So he's working for himself. He's not working for me. Right? Now, there's still a problem. The problem is, that's not, doesn't matter. When the goy is adata de nafsheka avid, well, there is a discussion in the Rishonim here. There's what to be talked about. But generally speaking, if a goy is doing something completely for himself, right? His motivation is himself, then the ikar is him. Now, but it's still a problem. The problem is, this is very complicated. Because even though that he's doing it for himself, what do people say?
Reuben's
Right? They
say Reuben's property.
Right, so people don't know necessarily that he's an aris.
Yeah.
But the truth is, if the majority of people are doing their lands like this with arisut, it's like a contractor job. It's not that I'm paying you by the hour or by the day. You finish the job, I pay you, right? Or in this case, maybe even better, that he is doing a job for himself really, because he takes percentage. He doesn't get paid by the day or by the hour. In that case, people are going to say, well, it's aris. Arisa barisute. This guy is an aris, and he's doing his arisut, and therefore people are not going to doubt that this guy has hired day workers paid by the hour or by the day, because they know he's an aris, and therefore he's doing his job. Now, what's the obvious question? That's understood, right? That works well. But, by the way, in the halachot of Shabbat, it's the same thing. People think that there is only a isur of amira lakum. This is one of the more unknown pieces of halacha. So we all understand that you can't tell a goy to do something that you can't do on Shabbat. That we know. Amira lakum is asur. But then there is another issue of hana'a mima'aseh akum, of benefiting from a melacha done by the goy for you without you even batting an eyelash or saying a word.
No, I'm listening.
Yeah, so imagine you are in your room and your maid that knows everything about your life is there as well. And she realizes that you did not remember to turn on your office light in your house where your study, your bet midrash is, and you want to learn after Suda. What do people do? You eat for half an hour, you go learn. What else is there to do, right? You want to go learn, and she sees that the light is off, right? And she comes and you didn't say anything, right? She has compassion on you. She turns on the light. You say Chazaku Baruch Hashem. What Goya Hachama, right? Yeah. So you can say that even, right? So imagine that. Can you go sit down and learn inside that place? Absolutely not. Even though they didn't say anything, it's a melacha that the goy did for a Jew, and that you cannot benefit from, unless imagine if you had like a little light, little desk light, whatever it is, you could have learned. That wasn't so geschmack. You had to but you could learn. But now she put like 20,000 illuminates. Amazing. Now it's amazing, right? Right?
Yeah. Daylight.
No, if it's day for sure. If there is any outside light besides what she did, that you could have done what you want to do right now, right? Then that would be, or even if she did it during the day, right? But then it became night. And now there is no outside light. Now you're benefiting directly from what she did. So that becomes a problem. That's hana'a mima'aseh akum. That's benefiting from a job done by a goy for a yid. Now, how about if there are 10 people in the room? She did it for everybody. Now, some of them are Jews, some of them are Gentiles. Well, how about that? Then you go after the rov. If rov of them, and this is like, you go to a hotel, for instance, on Shabbat, right? So they boiled up some water. Nowadays it doesn't even necessarily work like that. Everything is a direct pipe. It's not like boilers the way it used to be 85 years ago. But imagine that they boiled up some water, and they did it for the hotel residents, right? So what's the majority? Well, if it's not a Pesach hotel or any Jewish program going on there, right, so then the majority is goyim. So they boiled up water today. Can you go get some hot water for coffee in the morning? Yeah. No problem with that, because the water was boiled up for the majority. Majority is goyim. You're not driving hana'ah from something that was done for a yid. So even though that it was done for everyone in the hotel, and you happen to be a yid, it was done for the majority. And how about if the majority are Jews, right? The majority are Jews. But then the goy himself or herself also wants to use something, right? She wants to read her paper also. So she sits in your Bet Midrash over there. She did it for you and for herself. Now she sits, there's a couch there on the side, she sits and she reads her paper, right? Then it's mutar asur. You have, let's imagine, give you another case, right? You have a whole hotel, Pesach hotel, everyone is a Yid, right? Majority is Jewish. And she comes and she does it, but she also wants her coffee in the morning. Right? So she turns on she flips the switch on for the whole tank, but she wants her coffee as well. So there are 200 Jews and there's one goy. Mutar asur. So that case is mutar. Because if a goy is not benefiting himself or herself from it, doing it for the people, the masses, then you have to go after the rov. What's the majority? But if I am benefiting, I want this, right? When you're part of the beneficiaries of the melacha, you always have yourself in mind mainly, right?
What if you don't know? What if you don't know what her intent was?
No, we talk about the cases that you know.
What's
Right.
the difference of going to the elevator or the coffee? If she opens up the elevator, you can walk in with her? Or him?
If she's going in themselves, you're saying.
Yeah, if the hotel with 200 Jews and one non-Jew, and the non-Jew goes into the elevator to go to the 17th floor, and you run with her.
Okay, so put aside the elevator question, because elevator could have other issues with it. In a regular melacha, yes, mutar. Correct. That would be mutar. The question is, the elevator, the weight, does it add, does it change? The elevator is a very complicated, multifaceted question, right?
But just what if it's only her job? She doesn't care, Jew, non-Jew. She's like a robot. She doesn't look at how many.
Robots are very different, because again, robots would become, and it's something that's going to become a question. Again, we went out of Avodah Zarah to robot questions now. But robots is...
No, I meant that she's not in the mode, she's not saying I'm doing it for the Jew, I'm not doing it for the Goy, I'm just doing it as my job. I don't care.
So his job is defined by doing it for the people, and the masses of the people are kovea, what's considered the kavanah.
Program the robot.
But if you have actual robots, it will become a question as well. Again, like the Rashba writes, if you create a machine that does grama, that's no longer grama. It's considered your doing, right? If you program something to work in a certain way, that is mityaches acharecha, that is related and attributed to your doing, right? This again is something that is a topic by itself. I don't want to get too off topic on this, but there's a question if a person would damage something or kill someone with Shem HaMeforash, right? Like Moshe Rabbeinu killed the Mitzri, right? Is that considered your doing? You didn't do anything. You just sat there and the guy just drops dead, right? Is that considered killing? Is that not considered killing? This actually starts because there is a very big question that the Rosh, Rabbeinu Asher, asks at the end of Masechet Pesachim. We are told that Moshe Rabbeinu wrote 13 Sefer Torahs the last day of his life, but the Gemara also says that Moshe Rabbeinu died on Shabbat, day of the week, right? Shabbat, that's why we say one of the Sidkat Chazas that we say Mincha of Shabbat is because of that. So, how in the world was he allowed to write on Shabbat? Last we checked, it was asur to write on Shabbat. So Rosh doesn't answer this question. It's a big question. The Khatam Sofer, he says he wrote it with Hashba'at Kulmus. That means he used the name of the Malach of the writing, and he did it with that. It's basically like a Shema Meforash. Which a lot of questions to be asked on Khatam Sofer, because since when is that considered Ketiva, if a Malach writes it, you know? But nevertheless, it seems like Khatam Sofer holds that on Shabbat you would be patur for that. Now, Halachot Ketanot, Rabbi Yaakov Hajiz, he asks whether or not the case I mentioned by killing a person with Shema Meforash, right? I didn't say anything, I just mentioned the name, and boom, the guy died. Same thing as the Khatam Sofer with writing a Sefer Torah, right? So he says a person would be absolutely chayav. That's your doing, right? You are doing it. You are doing it. It's a system that works. You say A, B, and C, and it happens. That's you killing the person. You don't have to necessarily cut their throat to be killing. That way also it's considered still killing, right? And the majority, the overwhelming majority of the poskim take the side of Yaakov Hajiza that this is asur. Now, this used to be a cute little talk, but nowadays this is very, very important, because now in smart houses, and even less than smart houses, things are happening with your words, right? You say something and something happens, right? And if a system is built to follow your instructions, however your instruction is going to be, that is your doing. If you create a machine that does things through grama, it's cause and effects of, but it is meant to be doing that. It is a design to accomplish this. That Rashba writes, that's no longer considered grama, that is your doing. And maybe you're doing with a delay, but it is your doing nevertheless. So that's again in regards to a robot, but when you have a goy, you can't benefit from a totzah, a melacha v'goy for you, and that would be for oved kochavim. But says the Gemara, sadeu leoved kochavim mai shari mai tama arisa arisute. Now the obvious question on that is, so now what's the difference between this and the merchatz? Why can't you rent your merchatz to a goy and say arisa arisute kavid? Same thing as the field. You're just telling me that I could rent my field to the goy, even though the people, passerbyers, see it, and then they say, well, this is Reuben's field. It's still mutar because they say, it's Aris. Aris is doing it, Adata the Nafshe is doing it for himself. So why can't we say the same thing in Merchatz? Why can't we say the same thing in Merchatz? Says the Gemara, Merchatz nami amri aris aris the kavi. The Gemara answers, aris at the merchatz lo avdi inshi. The derech is not to do merchatz with arisut. Merchatz you don't do well. If you take care of the merchatz, you get 20%. It doesn't work like that. Field, if you care about it, if you really take care of it, it will produce better things. The produce would be a different quality, would be more, would be better. So therefore, there's incentive to make arisut. But, merchatz is pretty straightforward. You heat the water up, you put the thing here, you massage the guy, and you go home. There's no, it's pretty straight. So therefore, they would not do arisut for a merchatz. It's not something that you do this system. You pay them by the day. You come, you work today, you get paid, you go home, shalom al Yisrael. Therefore, when the guy sees that your merchatz is working on Shabbat, what is he going to think? He's not going to think Aris, because no one does Aris. He's going to think, Reuben works on Shabbat? He must have hired this guy to work for him on Shabbat, therefore it's a problem. Says the Gemara, Tanya, Rabbi Shimon ben Azar Omer, Lo yaskir adam sadeu lekuti mipnei shenikret al shemo. You should not rent your field to a kuti because it is called after your name. And this kuti is working your field on Chol HaMoed. Aval oved kochavim mai, but the Gemara says, wait a second. So what's the halacha by oved kochavim? It seems from Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar that you can't give it to a kuti, but you could give it to who? Goy. You could give it to a goy. So says the Gemara, what's the difference? The amri arisa arisute avid, because they say the aris is doing his arisut. So it says the Gemara, wait a second, this is really not making sense now. You're telling me that to oved kochavim you could give because passerby says this is a aris, but to a kuti you can't. In iachi kuti nami amri arisa arisuta avid, right? The kuti also, people will say, well, this is Aris, he's doing his Arisut. The Gemara says no. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar does not hold of this whole business of Arisa Arisute Kavit. He doesn't hold of this heter. He does not hold that the fact that people will see, they say, oh, this must be an Arisut. It doesn't work like that. He doesn't hold of the whole heter altogether. So wait a second. So what's the heter of Oved Kochavim? Because remember, Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar says, your field, to a goy, you can. To a kuti, you can't. What's the difference? And he doesn't hold of Arisut. So it must be a different heter. So listen to this part of the Gemara. Ela oved kochavim my tama mutar. You know why it's mutar to give it to a goy? Because the goy listens to you. You tell him, look, Muhammad, I'm giving this to you, right? I'm giving this to you on condition that you're not working on Saturdays, right? Chazak Baruch. He listens and he does it. You tell him ABC, he does ABC. Ekuti, Hashem Yirahem, right? You tell something to, we always, in Hashgacha business, we always say, the Vad Kashrut always says that it's better to have a mashgiach that is smart and alert, but is not a big Talmid Chacham. Is not a very learned person. You know why? Because you tell them do A, B, C, and when this happens, you call me. And they do exactly that. Right? But if the guy learned a little halachah and says, wait a second, this is bitul b'shishim, this is azoy, I remember in yeshiva I learned something, and it starts like, draining a cup, and you end up with tremendous amounts of problem. Right? And sometimes, this is the same thing over here. Says the Gemara, the goy, Amrina levesayit, you tell him and he listens. Kuti nami Amrina levesayit. The Gemara says, what? The kuti doesn't listen? The Gemara says exactly that. Kuti lo sayit. He doesn't listen to you. The Amar, Ana gemirna tifi minach. I learned more than you. I know all the halachot. I'm a good Jew, right? And I learned the halachot once upon a time, 90 years ago, and I remember all the details. So therefore, he starts doing things that he thinks is mutar, but it may not be mutar really, and therefore you get into a lot of trouble. So says the Gemara, my area mipanesh al shemot. So he says, wait a second, why do you have to say that's asur to give it to a kuti because it's called on the Jew's name? You should say it's asur because lifnei iver lo titen michshol. You are providing him with an opportunity of doing isurim. Because he's not going to listen. He's going to work on Shabbat or whatnot. And it's going to become a problem. So why do you say it's a problem of Nikret al Shemo should be because of Lifnei Iver? The Gemara says that's exactly true. There are two problems. Says the Gemara, Chada ve'od kamar. Chada mishum Lifnei Iver. One reason is because of Lifnei Iver. Ve'od, and on top of it, the additional reason is Mipenei shenikret al Shemo, because people know this place, this field, as your land, the Jews' land, and when you give it to a kuti and he does questionable stuff, people are going to say that the Jew is doing those questionable stuff, and therefore it's an additional reason why you can't do it. But Zat Hashem will continue this in the days to come. Hazak Baruch.